You saw Baltimore last year being at 8-3, and then Lamar Jackson was considered one of the best quarterbacks, winning the MVP a couple of years ago. And then the struggle that they had toward the end of the year, where they just couldn't seem to win a game, and then they wound up falling 8-9. How do you see Baltimore being part of the AFC North? And we know the struggle with Deshaun Watson. Is he even going to play? And then what that means for Cleveland, and then you have obviously Cincinnati and how they came out of nowhere to win the division. Do you see Baltimore being a team that can get back to be where the big boys are in the AFC?
I definitely like Baltimore to finish ahead of where they did last season. I think it goes a little bit underrated just how injured Lamar Jackson was down that stretch run, right? He missed a number of games. He kind of hobbled his way through a handful of others. So I think having him back and fully healthy really sets the trajectory for this team. The other thing to consider for me is I think this division gets a little bit softer, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Bengals won the division. They improved their position over the course of the offseason. So I still have them as the favorite to win the AFC North. But ultimately, I think we see the Mitchell Trubisky-led Steelers take a little bit of a step back. And to a question that you at least kind of teased, I don't think we see Deshaun Watson play much, if at all, this season in Cleveland. The way that the restructuring of his contract played out and how that was what pushed him over the edge to choose Cleveland seems like a pretty big signal that they are expecting him to face some sort of considerable suspension. So, I tend to look at what people do as opposed to what people say. And everything they're doing tells me that it's reasonable to expect that the Browns will be without him for a good chunk of games, if not the entire season. So those two things, I think, create a path for Baltimore this year.
I know Peter King said that was probably the worst contract ever given out in the history of football, the situation that Cleveland's made for themselves with Deshaun Watson. Do you see Baker Mayfield maybe even getting, with that uncertainty, them going back to Baker, or is that pretty much done?
Yeah, I think that bridge is entirely burned, which leads to an interesting point about these trade rumors with Carolina, right? Like, seemingly it feels like all paths lead to Baker Mayfield being released out of Cleveland, and so if that's the case, I mean, I don't see why anybody would step forward and willingly give away any sort of significant capital to try to acquire a guy that is likely going to be released in a couple weeks, if not a couple months' time.
As everybody knows, we are talking to co-founder of Pros and Joe's Charity League, Eric Romoff. The NFC East is so very interesting because we all know how horrible this division is. It's probably the worst division in football. It's crazy to say that. We've seen this back and forth year in and year out. You got the Cowgirls, who really have lost a significant amount of pieces this offseason. They really reached in the draft in every single category, from first, second, third, fourth, fifth. You have Jerry Jones showing everybody their cards and throwing their cards out there like an idiot after the draft. And the Eagles, I think, have made the biggest leap. I mean, adding Jordan Davis, trading for A.J. Brown. I mean, this team was a playoff team last year. It has gotten better in the offseason. They have a prolific offensive talent like A.J. Brown now coming to the team with Devontae Smith. So what is it with this division? What team really does look like the team that's going to take over this division moving forward? And is there any thought in your mind that this division could turn everything around this year and surprise the world, as me seeing it the way it is, as the worst division in all of football?
I don't know if I'd say this is going to be the worst division in all of football, but keep in mind that I am a Houston Texans fan, so I get direct line of sight to the dumpster fire that is the AFC South. But it's certainly not going to be the best, right? In terms of how the division shakes out, I mean, you really touched on the points, right? Like, overall, maybe if you're a Carson Wentz kind of guy, you can argue that the Commanders haven't improved their stock over the course of the offseason, but even giving them the benefit of the doubt, Philadelphia has improved their team by leaps and bounds, especially relative to the rest of this division. So, it's all going to come down to whether or not we see Jalen Hurts take a year 3 step forward. And if he does, I think Philadelphia wins this division pretty comfortably.
So rookie wide receivers, a lot of them were drafted this year, probably I think 5 of 6 picks at one point in this draft. Now, obviously, a lot has changed with the Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase's rookie year, so I'm not saying they necessarily have the years that they had, but could you see any of these guys being like a 2016 Michael Thomas, a 2018 Calvin Ridley, where they're really just the instant impact right away at their ADPs and good value?
Yeah, I think the important thing to touch on off the top there is just how unprecedented the rookie seasons of Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson over these last few years have been, right? It feels weird seeing it in back-to-back years, but it is the exception and not the rule. To your broader question, absolutely, and I think it ties back into our conversation about the viewpoint of the wide receiver position in the NFL. Many of the teams that decided to spend early first round draft capital on a wide receiver were doing so in direct contrast to paying their already very talented, somewhat veteran receiver the new market rate, right? As opposed to forking out that huge contract, they hit the reset button, they ship out A.J. Brown, and they draft Treylon Burks, right? And because that's the case, I'm expecting this Titans front office, as I carry forward with that example, to really look to continue to inject young wide receiver talent as opposed to eventually pay that second contract. So they very much so have a direct incentive, and everything they've told us about their philosophy around the position says that they are going to make Treylon Burks an immediate part of this offense. I think a very similar case is in Atlanta with Drake London. Obviously, you have Calvin Ridley, who's suspended for the entire year. Maybe that gets reduced a bit. But those are two guys that I think are going to immediately have considerable opportunity. And, I mean, all of these front offices are racing against the clock until these rookie wide receivers ask for or demand their second contract. So they're going to try to get the most out of them while they're still relatively affordable.
Packers, Buccaneers, last question for me. You look at these two teams, obviously the quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, who's won back-to-back MVPs, no Devontae Adams. They bring in a wide receiver in the second round, and Christian Watson, who a lot of people like. And I don't know, I think he's still a reach. I think he was drafted a little too early, if you ask me. But they didn't bring in another one, number one. You would think with their 2 first-round draft picks, they would move up for one of those wide receivers. They all fell really amongst, from 8 to really 16, and they were gone off the board. So they couldn't really make a move for a big wide receiver. And there was really nothing they could do in the offseason to bring in like an Odell Beckham, because you don't know when he's coming back, or anybody else, because there was nobody available. And they weren't going to trade anything for Tyreek Hill because they can't overpay for him, because they overpaid for their quarterback, who I think is the best quarterback in the NFL and makes everybody around it better. And then Tom Brady coming back. He retires, he doesn't retire, he retires, he doesn't retire. He's back again, ladies and gentlemen, with this team. And this team really didn't lose that many pieces. Leonard Fournette looks like he's trying to go to the Patriots. Now he's not going to the Patriots. I don't know what the hell is going on with some of the players, but this team is back. With these 2 quarterbacks, do you think that these 2 quarterbacks can make a run again this year to go for another Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough with them being in the same conference, right? Just mathematically, they both can't make it out of the NFC. But I certainly think that they are going to be contenders to come out of the NFC. I gave up on trying to play the father time card against Tom Brady like a decade ago, so I'm not going to start saying that now. Yeah, very much so. The overwhelming majority of the pieces are back there in Tampa Bay. Arguably the biggest question mark in terms of getting back to last year's roster is Rob Gronkowski, and at least all indications are he's going to party over the course of the summer and stumble back into camp somewhere midway through the preseason. So I expect to see him back in Tampa Bay. Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, even if they were to have selected one of the kind of top early first round wide receivers, it is almost impossible to replace a talent like Devontae Adams. So Christian Watson has some incredibly large shoes to fill. So I don't think we see quite as prolific a passing game out of Green Bay as we have in seasons past. But I do think that we still see a very efficient passing offense. I think we see Aaron Rodgers distributing the ball to a number of different players, including Aaron Jones. I think will take a step forward as a receiver out of the backfield. And ultimately, this offense will be very effective for Green Bay as well.
All right, a sleeper you love and a guy that people love that you think is going to be a reach this year, a bad pick.
I guess I'll start with the latter. As a result of Marquise Hollywood Brown being traded to the Arizona Cardinals, Rashad Bateman's stock has absolutely skyrocketed. He is a very capable sophomore wide receiver. There's a lot of things to like about his skill set and about his game. But the thing that I think is being overlooked is that the reason why Hollywood Brown wanted out of Baltimore is just how underutilized the passing game is, and specifically the passing game to wide receivers. So Bateman is very much so the one in Baltimore, but that's not going to lead to the typical workload that we associate with a wide receiver one in today's NFL. So I think he's going a little bit too high. In terms of some of my sleepers, I mean, it really ebbs and flows, from week to week. Over the last couple of weeks, I've found myself getting a lot of Ezekiel Elliott. He's really started to slip into kind of the mid fourth round pretty consistently. And while I don't think we see the Zeke of a couple years ago, he still had over 1,000 yards. He was one of 7 guys to surpass his touch volume that he did last year. And he was doing most of that while banged up. So there's O-line better. They're certainly getting healthier. He has the offseason to get healthy. So to be able to scoop up a guy that, should have 60-65% of the workload behind one of the better offensive lines in the league, happy to do that midway through the fourth. You rewind a few weeks prior, Darnell Mooney coming off of his 140 targets last year in an offense that was allowing Justin Fields to throw the ball like 12 times a game. I mean, he was slipping well into the 7th and 8th rounds. Now his ADP has started to climb back up, so less value there, but a guy that I still love targeting and think very much so as a wide receiver 2 that potentially has wide receiver 1 upside if Justin Fields takes a step forward this year. The best thing to really do is just keep an eye on where these guys are being drafted, right? Jump into best ball drafts, jump into mock drafts, and really use that as an opportunity to gauge the market and how the market feels about a player. And anytime that a player moves considerably in one way or the other is usually an indicator that something has changed in terms of public perception, and you can probably take advantage of that.
Well, we really appreciate you giving us our half an hour. And we love getting the guests on. We want to give them enough time on our show where they can get out all the information and all the different things that they're doing, not only with their charity work or some of the sponsors and advertisements that they do, but everything that you do with what you're great at in fantasy sports. So thank you for joining us. Tell the fans how they can find you, Eric.
Yeah, best way to find me is on Twitter. That's @FantasyNav. I contribute for drroto.com, for goingfor2.com. I have a new project we spun up a few months ago called Green Screens Media, but all of that is consolidated and rolled up into my Twitter handle, which is @FantasyNav.
We really appreciate you joining us. We'll get you on very, very soon. You're great. Thank you for all the information. And as everybody knows, he's the co-founder of Pros and Joe's Charity League, Eric Romoff. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for having me on, guys.